I think it's important that entrepreneurs just acknowledge that you don't have all the answers in the beginning. We want to go and establish these, what's my 10-year BHAG? I don't freaking know. You want me to come up with a 10-year goal? We've been doing this thing for a couple of years. We're going to be 10 years. I don't know. We feel some obligation to put this forward because that's what the business books that we read told us we should do, and that we need to approach it with this grand sincerity, and that this needs to be our guiding light moving forward. I think it's good to just say, like, we don't know. And one of the things that I was always happy to admit is I don't know what I'm doing and what is going on here, but I'm really trying hard, and we're going to figure this out together. I think if more entrepreneurs did that, that is good leadership. And I think their team would give them a lot more grace than if they just kind of peacock around like they're God's gift to business because they started something that happened to work out and they don't even know why or how.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Well, hey, Ryan. Welcome to Inside the Process, backstage at Playbook 2024. We are so excited to have you here with us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your business.
Sure. Been a serial entrepreneur literally since college, 19 years old, started my first business online back when Google was a science fair project. And I think like a lot of business owners, it started out as a side hustle just to make some extra money, turn around, and it's a real business, and had to figure out what that meant. And so that's kind of been my journey over the last couple of decades is how do you actually do this stuff at scale? I think business is hard. Entrepreneurship is hard, but starting a business is easier than I think a lot of people think it is. It's really the scaling part that's really hard. And so that's kind of where my passion is today. And that's kind of where the bulk of my focus is. So I get to now just start companies, acquire companies, fold them into our holding group, and I get to play in other people's businesses, which is a lot more fun than starting them from scratch.
Speaking of which, I think you've built and scaled and mentored more businesses than most of us can count. So when you're in the early stages of a new venture, what's the first process you put in place to really keep the chaos under control from the very start?
The first question I ask any business that comes in, whether it's through an acquisition or a private client, is just, how do we create value in the marketplace? Which I know sounds really, really simple, but it's not asked as often as it should be. I think a lot of businesses don't realize why they deserve to exist. We ask questions around what are our goals and how do we do different things? And nobody pauses to say, like, do we deserve to even win? And so the first question that I always ask is, okay, how do customers and clients happen in this business? How do they get here? Because without those, you had no business. The second question I ask is, okay, once we got them, how do we serve them? So I want to get crystal clear on how do we sell and how do we serve? And I want this visualized. I want a picture. And it starts off with like sticky notes on a whiteboard, but I want a visual picture of what is essentially the customer journey, starting from the moment of awareness all the way through the different steps and stages of when somebody becomes a customer or client. And then how do we deliver on the promises that we made throughout that process? Once we have that, now you can pull back and say, okay, within this value flow, this is what we do. This is why we deserve to exist. What are the pieces within it that we don't want to screw up? What are the pieces in it that are recurring that we want to make sure we nail? That's where the actual process documentation begins for us. So we start with the value creation process and work backwards from there into figuring out what needs to be systemized and documented.
It sounds like you're describing the 80-20 rule a little bit. So are you documenting the 20% of the processes that pretty much define 80% of
Yeah, and in the beginning, it might be the 80-20 of the 80-20. So it's, 2%. But what it is it's a process for coming up with what are the processes that are most worthy of documentation now. Because we did it. I have always been a big believer in systems and process documentation. I've always been it because I've seen just how incredibly inadequate I was to just scale what I was doing and to try to teach it to somebody else. I watched me burn out, and I watched me hire people, attempt to teach them what I knew, and everybody fell in the process. And it wasn't until we began to actually document and systemize that there was any success at all. The problem is we didn't have a process for knowing what we should document and systemize. And so we tried to document and systemize everything. And one, that takes a really long time. But then you have issues of discoverability. Now you're hiring somebody. What are you going to teach them? Do you teach them everything? So we finally just started from first principles. What does every business do? We sell stuff. We fulfill the stuff we sold. Every business at its core does that. So let's get really crystal clear on how we do those two things. Let's get crystal clear on what are the individual steps and stages within those main value drivers that we don't want to screw up, that are absolutely integral to the process. Let's systemize those. In most of the businesses that we go into, we will start with 6, 7, 10, 12, maybe playbooks, processes, SOPs, and that's enough. Now, as the company scales, maybe we'll get into the dozens of them, but it's that first core that, to your point, is the 80-20 that makes the biggest difference.
And do you feel like you're documenting what the company does? Because it sounds a little bit like you're kind of documenting what's the core of our business and what everybody needs to know. Or are you also documenting the things that's like, hey, if I could delegate this right now, I know I can be successful and invest here to help grow our company and scale. So how are you kind of figuring out which processes you need to document?
We're going to start with just what are the ones that are most important to the customer, to the client, because we got to get that right. Then we're going to go back there and we're going to say, okay, all these different steps and stages, who is uniquely responsible for these things? Now, in the beginning, in the early stages of a business, the business owner is looking at this like, well, me. And the mistake that they make is they go, okay, I need to make this one kind of magical unicorn hire. I need to hire an operator, an integrator. They're just going to take all this work off my plate. And it's just not how it works. The way that it works is you figure out what are all the things that you're doing that maybe in the beginning you shouldn't be doing or that you can hand off. And you do it one step or stage at a time, one playbook at a time, but you don't hand it off until you have that playbook done. So our rule is no playbook, no hire. We're not going to hire for a role until that person, we know when they come in that we're setting them up for success. And what setting them up for success looks like is, hello, welcome, new hire. So the work that you're doing is X, Y, and Z. And where that fits into our overarching value process is right here. So this is, if they're on the sales and marketing team, then they're going to be most interested in that, the growth part, that the customer client acquisition, but to be able to show them and give them the context of your specific role fits right here at this piece of this overarching. So now they got context. And now here's specifically how you do that one thing. But here's all the people you're working with because they're going to be involved in something. If you give somebody that, this is how you make hires that succeed, that don't burn out, fail, and where you got to jump back in and do the role again. Because that's what happens. That's what business owners do. We try to fling people at problems. There's a lot of training in the beginning to get them up to speed. Ultimately, because there's not good system documentation or context, they still fail anyway, or they didn't do as good a job. And now you have the double job of managing the person, training the person, and doing half of their work for them. And then when they fail, you got to replace them and do it all over again. So we want to stop that. And the way that we stop that is we get crystal clear on how do we create value? What are those steps and stages? Document, and then we make hires after we've created the documentation.
I want to come back to something you said earlier. You said, figure out why you deserve to win. And all of these things that you're talking about are sort of connected to that. We'll call it the North Star, if you will. Would you say that when you're thinking about why we deserve to win, all of these things are connected and answering that question? Or is that something that you have to define differently? Is it your mission? Is it your values? Is it what you want your culture to be? Like, what is the why we deserve to win?
The first answer to that is we deserve to win because we deliver this value to the marketplace. And I think, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think the mistake that business owners make is they go, okay, we need to really get very clear on like, what is our mission and our purpose? And that's good, but it's inherently very kind of internal looking, navel gazing, why are we so important? Your customers and clients usually don't care about any of that stuff. Like maybe when they get closer to the brand, they'll get excited about it. But in the beginning, they have this very specific problem and they need you to solve it. And so how do we do that? Like, how do we capture and create marketplace value? This is the first question that every business needs to answer. And that's why every business exists or doesn't. You can have plenty of businesses with very noble, high and mighty, ivory tower missions, but if they don't execute and deliver value, it doesn't freaking matter. Customer doesn't care.
Right.
And I've seen so many of these companies that are like, oh, all they want to do is trumpet their values and their mission, all this stuff. Somebody's just like, I got a problem. Like, can you solve it or not? Because I got my own stuff, my own life. I don't care about what it is that you're doing over here. I just think we grossly overstate our importance to the outside world as entrepreneurs sometimes.
No.
There's people who just want to be served. How do you get them? How do you find them? How do you convince them that you're the one to serve them? And then how do you serve them? That's where it starts. Let's get really good at that customer-facing, client-facing work. Once that's dialed in, now I think you earn the right to say, okay, well, what are our goals? How can we now grow and scale this thing? Now that we're clear on how we deliver value, what are our goals? And what is our underlying purpose and mission for this whole business as a whole? What are our, vision? But to me, that comes last after you first answer the question of like, why do we deserve to exist? Then you do all the other piece.
How long would you say that you are really just focused on the customer and building the foundation of your business before you get serious about your culture?
I think for the first $1 million in general, it is just go sell some stuff. And I know that this is not popular. Everybody wants to say like, oh no, you need to be like values first. If you're being honest, talking to an entrepreneur and everybody's just hanging out, there's no cameras running or anything like that. Because I remember this happened to me in one of my businesses. We were growing, we were scaling really, really well. And I was talking about the goals that we were going to do. And a young woman who's working for us, very, very sincere, cared deeply about the company and our customers. And I'm talking about our goals and how we're going to grow. And she came to me and she said, this is great, this is inspiring, but like, why are we doing this? Like, what's the greater purpose? Like, what's our greater mission? And what I wanted to say in that moment was, well, we're doing this so that we can make money. I can give some of it to you and we can all eat food. Like, cause in the beginning, in the early days of the business, that's why we do it. Most of us started our companies because we needed money so that we could eat food and provide shelter. And I think to pretend like that's not the case is just, so in the beginning, that's what it is and that's enough. But if that's all it ever is, that's a problem. You won't scale. You will not aggregate the talent, the right talent that's going to be, they're not motivated by that. Like I knew that young woman, I couldn't say that. It was what I was feeling at the time, but I couldn't say that to her because that wasn't going to be good enough for her and I would have lost that person. So what I had to say is, you just asked me a really good question. I don't have a really great answer. Can I get back to you on that? And so I think when you get to the point where there are people on your team who need to be motivated by more than just money and survival, which is for a founding team, what's our mission? Don't die. Don't go out of business. And typically that's going to happen at between about $500,000 and $1 million. Prior to that, you're still really not sure what business you're in. You're still pivoting, you're still trying different stuff. The only thing that you need to be focused on is I want to deliver for these people who are giving me money. I want to deliver value for them. And our greater purpose, we're going to figure out what that is as we go along. Usually it's not going to happen until you just haven't sold enough stuff to enough people to really honestly know what that is until you're at about $500,000 in revenue, has been my experience. If you don't have that dialed in between $1 million and $2 million, you're not going to scale to 10. So it's absolutely unnecessary in the beginning and it's absolutely essential at scale.
You've said a couple of things. You said no playbook, no hire, which tells me you care about people. You said you protected your new hire and you didn't say to her what you were thinking. Mm-hmm. Tells me you're a great leader. Is that enough? Is you being a great leader enough before your, first million where you're not focused on culture? And do you feel like that bleeds into your team and it preserves, not losing these people? Is that enough?
It buys you time. It buys you the benefit of the doubt while you're still figuring it out. I think it's important that entrepreneurs just acknowledge that you don't have all the answers in the beginning. We want to go and establish these, what's my 10-year BHAG? I don't freaking know. You want me to come up with a 10-year goal? We've been doing this thing for a couple of years. We're going to be 10 years. I don't know. We feel some obligation to put this forward because that's what the business books that we read told us we should do, and that we need to approach it with this grand sincerity and that this needs to be our guiding light moving forward. I think it's good to just say like, we don't know. And one of the things that I was always happy to admit is I don't know what I'm doing and what is going on here, but I'm really trying hard and we're going to figure this out together. I think if more entrepreneurs did that, that is good leadership. And I think their team would give them a lot more grace than if they just kind of peacock around like they're God's gift to business because they started something that happened to work out and they don't even know why or how. So I just think that honestly, that transparency and recognizing that your first 7 hires, that early group, they're going to join the business for very different reasons. And usually that first founding group is not going to be the group that's there when you're 40 to 50 people. Usually they're just not. And that's okay. But in the beginning, you want to be transparent enough to buy you that time and to say, like I said, you've asked a great question. I don't have a great answer. Let's work together to try to figure out what it is, though.
You said, you don't really look at like the 10-year picture and you just say, well, I don't know. How far ahead do you look when it comes to goal setting?
3 years. We found that 3 years is the sweet spot. I've done this so many times. We've tried to go out to 5 years and just, I don't know. And look, I freely admit this might be some of my own entrepreneurial inadequacies. I think when a company is scaling north of, $50 million in revenue, then it probably does become necessary to start to think out 5+ years. You likely have way more data and resources at that point at your disposal to be more predictive and more accurate in your prediction. The thing I like about 3 years, I'll tell you what I don't do. I hate annual planning. It's a spork. It is too long. It's what everybody does and it works for nobody. And yet it still is what we all go back to. It's like New Year's resolutions. I think at this point, we've all kind of agreed that these things don't work. They're abandoned by, the second or third week in February. The same is true for most companies' annual plans. So what we do when we are integrating a business at post-acquisition or when we're post-startup phase. So now we've been doing this for 12, 18, 24 months. We kind of know what we're doing here. We're north of $500,000, $1 million, $2 million in revenue. We got enough data to say, all right, let's begin to ask some of the longer term questions. We're going to look out 3 years. Where do we want to be in terms of revenue and profitability in that time? What do you think we can grow from a revenue perspective? What do you think, what profit margin would we like to maintain? The beauty of 3 years is if you can increase 24% compounded year over year growth 3 years in a row, you'll double in 3 years. And so kind of the minimum goal that we would have for any of our companies is to double in 3. Because any of these businesses we're working, we should be able to have compounded 24% year over year growth. So we should be able to double in 3. So minimum, that's what we're targeting while maintaining what would be acceptable profit margins for that industry. And that varies industry to industry. Let's say it's 20%. But what we really love to do, kind of the gold standard in terms of goal setting, is can we go top line to bottom line? So can we take our current top line revenue and have that transform into our bottom line profitability 3 years from today? And we'll just say what would need to be true for that to be the case. So we're going to set that 3-year target. We're then going to break that up into 12 quarterly chunks. And then we don't plan on an annual basis. We plan in 90-day quarterly sprints. And we're always just saying what needs to be true this quarter to stay on track for that 3-year target. If something big happens, we can adjust, reassess. But that's our process for how we do goal setting and planning.
If we're giving a mentor session to an early entrepreneur, what's, one frame of thought that you tell every young, I guess it doesn't have to be young, but just every entrepreneur, like what's the one thing you tell them, like, just keep this in your mind and you'll be good moving forward?
Business is about people. And that's true. And everybody says that there's no such thing as a how problem, only a who problem. And you want to make sure you get the right people on the bus. Like we've heard all of these things. And it's true. Definitely, if you can have better people, your business is going to succeed. I like to flip it though and say, and what I say to our portfolio clients, my goal is not to hire a team of only A players and rock stars. My goal is to build a company that doesn't require them. If we can build the right kind of systems to where A players and rock stars aren't required for this thing to work, then it's going to work. Because I think as entrepreneurs, we have to acknowledge there's plenty of days when we're not exactly A players or rock stars ourselves. We fall short. And so if you can be honest about your own inadequacies, you have to be accepting of the fact that you're not always going to have A players and rock stars on your team. And even the A players and rock stars, whatever the hell that even means, they're not going to be at their game. So how do we build a system that doesn't require them? Because what we found is A players and rock stars, you know what kind of companies they want to work for? Companies with really great systems where they're going to be able to win and succeed, even if they're not at their best. So you wind up getting both. So I encourage people, don't focus so much on the people and the talent side. It is important, but it's what everybody tells you to do. Focus more on the system side first. Because if you dial in your systems, you can miss a little bit on talent and still be okay. If you dial in your systems, you're going to attract the right kind of talent because the best people want to work for companies where they can win, and you're going to win at companies that have great systems. So.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good word for folks that are listening today. Thank you so much for joining us backstage on Inside the Process. We loved having you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.